Hello and welcome to Series 3 of Crisis What Crisis, a podcast designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and continue to come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt the new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and one-time inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 5 years, I've put all of my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking as the first lockdown began that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success, but there are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I talk to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. Our guests share their experiences, though, with honesty, often with humour, but always in the hope that they might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis conversations worth sharing. Stay tuned at the end of the episode when I'll give my thoughts and takeaways, the lessons, if you like, for when life unravels. And if you enjoy the podcast, please do subscribe and give us a rating and a review. It really helps make sure these stories reach an even wider audience of people who may find them useful. And that, in the end, is what it's all about. Crisis What Crisis is generously supported by Mindstream, a brilliant company who harness the power of music for personal well-being, whether it be music for meditation, to help focus, sleep, stress relief, yoga and fitness, rejuvenation, even grief and loss. Mindstream is there to improve human performance. I've tried it, it works, and I'd recommend having a listen to the Mindstream catalogue yourself. Just search Mindstream, that's mind with a Y, on Spotify. Thanks again for joining me. I could not be more delighted that our guest today is the legendary writer, performer, producer, and all-round genius, Nile Rodgers. Nile is perhaps best known as the co-creator of Chic and the producer of a near endless list of classic albums by David Bowie, Madonna and Diana Ross. More recently, he's worked with Sam Smith, Disclosure and Daft Punk. His work has resulted in 500 million worldwide album sales, 75 million singles, multiple Grammy and other awards. He's also the creator of the brilliant We Are Family Foundation, a not-for-profit that was well ahead of its time, focusing on reducing inequality and increasing life chances on behalf of the disadvantaged. Like I say, legendary. But Nile's life has not been without challenge. In fact, from birth, it's been a life littered with crisis as well as success. An upbringing of continual drama, addictions, grief, and cancer are just some of the mountains he's climbed throughout a truly astonishing 68 years. Nile Rodgers, thank you so much for joining us today on Crisis What Crisis. How are you?
I'm very well today.
Good. I'm delighted to hear it. Nile, we're obviously here to talk about crisis. That's the focus of our podcast. And to be frank, it's quite hard to know where to start with your astonishing life. But before we explore that, I want to pass on my condolences to you and your family following the loss of your mother, Beverly, on December the 27th.
Thank you.
She died after a long battle with Alzheimer's, I understand.
Yes. And I mean, talk about a crisis. So today is the 26th, and my mom is still, I've not been able to make any funerary plans.
Sorry.
She's in the back of a refrigerated truck because of COVID. Talk about crisis.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
It's horrible.
It must be incredibly difficult for you and your family.
Breaking our hearts. It you know, when you go there and you see something that's so graphic like that, it really reminds you of images of, you know, bodies thrown into mass graves.
Oh my word. Yeah. Yeah, just so distressing. I'm so sorry to hear that. Now, your mum was an extraordinary woman who led an extraordinary life, but also a life, you know, also riven with crisis. The first of which, of course, you shared because it was your arrival. Your mum was aged just 14 when you were born, I think. She had to give you up, but later she fought to get you back. with the help of your grandmother. You researched those early months of your life in great detail for your brilliant autobiography. How have you been reflecting on it now, can I ask?
With a lot of emotion, and strangely enough, we're at a unique period in time where I'm now getting a lot more information, which is incredible. I decided to sell my cars and my guitar collection and a lot of my artwork because I feel like I'm hoarding it. It feels uncomfortable to me. And in the course of looking up experts and things like that, I find that the world has gotten so small that now I'm involved with these people who were, I got my first job at 9 years old. And the man that I worked for, I am now talking to his granddaughter, step-granddaughter.
Yeah.
Tonight I have a Zoom call with the granddaughter who's going to talk to me about her mother who worked at the same establishment.
Oh, wow. So you're still putting the story together now. You're still...
Incredible.
Yeah. You detailed, as I mentioned, your upbringing in New York and LA. You sort of bounce between the two in your autobiography, The Freak. You describe your childhood as strange and interesting. Others might describe it as a never-ending, relentless, unrelenting journey of crisis. I'm going to attempt to summarize it briefly, if I may. Your father, talented musician himself, separated from your mum. He became an addict and would appear occasionally in your life. On one of those occasions, I think you were age 8. You had to talk him down when he was threatening to throw himself off a building. Your mother and your white Jewish stepfather, Bobby, who you adored, were both heroin addicts. Your 4 brothers were at various times heroin addicts. Your childhood home was a magnet, it seems, from reading your autobiography, for New York's sort of high-functioning heroin community, many of them musicians. You suffered from severe asthma as a child. At one stage, you were sent to an institution to recuperate, and there you witnessed the appalling abuse of other children. At 13, you were sniffing glue. Harder drugs, including LSD, followed. And this chaos continues throughout your younger years. And I'm really only providing small parts of the story here. It is in many ways, Niall, a miracle that you survived. So the question is, how did this boy stay alive, let alone ultimately thrive in the way that you did?
As dire as that sounds, the way you just put it.
I'm sorry.
No, all right.
I hope it wasn't inaccurate.
It was almost perfect. My 4 brothers, they didn't become heroin addicts. They became addicts of other substances.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. It's good. I mean, they wouldn't be offended or anything, nor am I. But it's impossible to really understand my story without understanding the period. So I'm in I was born in 1952. So I grew up during the hippie era. My mom and dad were beatniks. So we were all into alternative lifestyles and philosophies and very open-minded. So in a strange way, things were fun because we were exploratory. We were like looking like, what's this? What's that? I could, recite the liturgy of Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism and the Bhagavad Gita and all sorts of stuff, because that's what was happening in hippie world. Everything from S to primal therapy, primal screen therapy, like everything. I had a chat with Paul McCartney the other day, and I was telling him about one day when my girlfriend's other boyfriend, that's how cool we were, right? My girlfriend had another boyfriend, and he was working for the Lennons at the time, and he talked John Lennon into taking primal screen therapy. And Paul was cracking up. He said, "No, I remember that because he called me up trying to get me." So you got to go back to the time. The time was it was all of this information, all of these alternative lifestyles, and my parents were super intellectuals, very kind people, and because of their love, I was able to get through their extremely self-centeredness because of their drug addiction. When you're a heroin addict, you can't help but be self-centered, but they were still very loving. They were just victims of their of their addiction. So it's not quite as hard as you think, because I had so many remedial programs and tutors and teachers and influencers and mentors and people around me, everyone from superstars that would range from Frank Sinatra on one level to bums on the street who were Mensa level smart.
Yeah. And you said that sort of drugs, crime, and love was the gravy that kept you all together, which is sort of poetry.
Right. But you got to remember that you're great, but that kept the family together from my mom and dad's point of view.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, the only crime I've ever committed in my life was some really bad kids that I was with stole a bicycle, and I, like an idiot, took the bike back because I felt so bad for the kid, and the cops arrested me, and I was taking the bicycle back. So the crimes I break are, doing drugs and driving too fast, but I was never involved in the kinds of stuff that my parents were into, which was basically just selling drugs.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that your parents, or your mother and your stepfather, were super bright, intellectual, curious people. They were also incredibly brave, right? Because a mixed race couple in the 50s was rare, and I assume that was incredibly tough at times for them as well.
Yeah, especially when the father is white and the mother is black. It was a little bit more common the other way around because of jazz musicians and show business people and sports people. Typically, you'd have some famous sports guy who would have a white girlfriend or something like that. But it wouldn't usually be the other way around. So it just shows you how incredibly hip my stepfather was. The way I put it in my book, I think I say that he had angles and perspectives that would make Miles Davis contemplate his own sense of cool. He was that guy. I mean, everybody called him White Bobby because he was cool. I mean, he was just that cool.
I mean, it's so hard looking back on your childhood. So it's difficult for anyone, isn't it? Of course, but there was no reading the book. There was seemingly no real period of calm. There's this positivity that you've just described, in such a generous way, but there doesn't seem to have been any sort of period of calm in your childhood. I mean, did it feel? Do you remember it as being sort of a series of moments of crisis, or is that just not how you reflect on it now?
Well, it wasn't. There were never really what I would call prolonged moments of calm because my life was so nomadic. I believe that I wrote, I'm not sure everything I wrote in the book because a lot of it got edited out, but I never went to the same school for longer than a few weeks or months at a time until I could control my own destiny, which was around 14 years old. So when I was 14, that was the first time I started school somewhere near the beginning of the year and ended school near the end of that year. That was just one semester, one time out of my entire childhood until I was 17 or 18. And at that point, I was completely independent. I was independent at 14. I left home shortly thereafter, got my job at Sesame Street around 18 or 19. And that's it. I was done. I was a professional at that point.
Well, I mean, earlier than that, you describe yourself as the world's oldest 8-year-old. Never mind 14, 15. You're the world's oldest 8-year-old. I mean, where does the strength of character come from? You know, where do you sort of, you know, trace that kind of that unbelievable resilience?
It may sound strange to you, but if you were my age, you would realize that 8-year-olds in New York City, 9-year-olds in New York City were very independent kids. We didn't have yellow school buses. We had to get to school the same way adults got to work. Right. We took public transportation. And that was a common thing. It actually freaks me out now when I see a woman who got arrested because she let her 11-year-old. I go, 11? I flew from Los Angeles back to New York when I was 7. What are you talking about? I had a job at 9. Like, kids now really get to be kids for a long time. When I was a kid, you had to think like an adult. And I was not unique. Most of my friends, they did a lot of the same things that I did. They had after-school jobs. You sought after-school jobs because that was your remedial income. It was like your parents were poor. We lived in the ghetto. So you needed that extra training and extra money and things like that. And some of those kids had to have those jobs to actually help their families. I was one of the fortunate ones that I got to spend my own money, but there was never a sense of prolonged calm. And I think that in my life was a good thing, because what's the job that I have now as an adult? I get to solve problems. Every single day of my life that I wake up, I have a problem. There is no day that I wake up and go, whew, how cool was that? Like, I just looked at a new record that I have coming out, and it's great. And they sent me the demo of the video last night. I didn't look at it last night. I just knew it would be great. I watched it this morning, and I went, "Oh my God!"
Yeah. I want to try and join the dots between this part of the conversation and your unbelievable work ethic a little bit later, if I may. But let's just go back a little bit, if that's okay.
Quite all right.
All this crisis in your life, right? It couldn't. It's remarkable to me that it couldn't suppress, you know, this kind of natural talent that you had, right? What you describe as your sort of, you know, genetic love of music. And it was about, I hope I got my maths right, it's about 53 years ago that you first picked up a guitar, 1968. Do you think these crises actually accelerated your talent? Do you think they fueled your drive and ambition?
I don't know. I was fairly proficient on the flute when I picked up the guitar, and a pretty good clarinet player. It's just that during the hippie era, like, how funny would that be? You're doing a protest song and you're singing a Bob Dylan song and keep playing a clarinet. It was like, nah. So when I finally picked up the guitar, a very fortunate mistake happened. I was playing the guitar over and over and over again, and I had a Beatles songbook, and I was trying to play this song called "A Day in the Life," and I was doing everything I could. I mean, just painstakingly playing these chord positions that were in the Beatles songbook. Now, I could read music very well at that point. I was, 14, 15, 16, something like that, and then I couldn't understand. So the only thing that my brain could translate to the guitar, which was not part of the symphony orchestra, was I took words from symphonic instruments, the ones that I sort of excelled in, which were woodwinds, and playing a reeded instrument. We have this technique called embouchure, which is having the proper shape of your mouth on the mouthpiece to get the right tone. And I kept thinking that the equivalent of embouchure on the guitar, I just hadn't mastered. Somehow I had the fingering right, but I wasn't quite nailing it. And all that was wrong was I didn't know how to tune the damn guitar. My mom's boyfriend at the time came in and said, "Whoa, what's going on, pal? What do you got that thing tuned, like a violin or something?" He came and he retuned the guitar for me, and I hit the first chord to A Day in the Life, and it was just beautiful. And I went very slowly, boom. I read the news today, oh boy, dun, 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 about a lucky man who made the grade. Dun, 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 dun. And I went, oh my God. And I was all into it. I told Sir Paul last week, I said, man, I felt like Sir Edmund Hillary.
That was the moment.
I'm like, I made it. And it all just happened so quickly. Retrospectively, I say quickly, but it took weeks of me doing the same thing over again. And magically, because I had been doing the wrong thing, but I was doing the wrong thing with such intensity that when somebody finally told me the right way of doing the wrong thing, it was actually more right than other novices. I mean, because I was a total journeyman, but because I had practiced so hard, and when I finally got the proper tuning, I had the strength. And I don't know if you know anything about playing guitar, but it's building up that strength. And I was able to play that F chord in A Day in Your Life. And my friends went, whoa, you can play an F chord? Like, that was a big deal, you know.
How is it, do you think, when you look back, that the sort of channel was open? Do you know what I mean? How is it that you were able to kind of be on receive, given the life you'd had up until that point?
I don't know. You know, people often ask, even to this day, is it genetic or is it environmental? Am I a creature of my environment, or is it in my blood? I don't know. I was talking to a gentleman of Nigerian descent yesterday, and I told him that, you know, through DNA testing, I know basically where I come from. And we were a particularly artistic tribe in Nigeria known as the Bini people. And he was like, oh, well, of course you were destined to be an artist. All Bini are artists. They were the ones who made everything. And I'm like going, yeah. But I don't really know, because I don't believe in things that I can't absolutely say are scientifically, positively. I really hate to speak in absolutisms, because I can think of a million times where I thought that I had a problem solved and I was dead wrong. And then I can think of a time where I was going, yeah, we're going to put this out. And next thing you know, it's number one.
Yeah. I think your story is just the greatest story to demonstrate, I suppose, the sort of resilient, kind of armor-plated power of creativity. And it just astounds me. Those early years of success, Niall, an amazing time to be alive. You find your way into Sesame Street live band, as you mentioned, then the Apollo, and then later the sort of explosive birth and growth of disco. You meet Bernard Edwards, and of course you create Chic, an amazing cast of characters in your life along the way, many of whom very sadly are not with us anymore. It's easier in a way to list the people that you didn't meet and work with than it is those that you did. Now, do you reflect on that period of your life where everything was heading in the right direction at sort of supersonic speed as being crisis free?
No, because it was, every day was a crisis. It was, people don't understand that. Probably the most relaxing part of a musician's life, a working musician's life, is at the end of the day when you look in your book and figure out, okay, what am I doing tomorrow? Like, I got through today.
Yeah.
Because in a strange way, it's almost like war. Like, every day is like a battle. What am I gonna succeed at or fail at? And some of the failures that I've had felt crushing at the time. And then years go by and people call me up and they're like the happiest person in the world. Hey, man, nice to see you again. Let's do this. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, you know, you fired me. I thought you hated my guts. And, you know, so things change, but I'm a worker. I always describe myself as a workhorse. I remember when I was a child and I saw this film, Ben-Hur, and the slaves were rowing the ship, and the galley slaves were rowing the ship, and the commander comes down and he tells the slaves that you live to serve this ship. And I'll never forget this. This is the credo that I live by. You live to serve this ship. Row well and live. And that's what I do. I row well and I live. And I wake up every day going, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? Just now, before you and I got on this call, I'm working with Idina Menzel, JT Lewis, a bunch of other artists, and it's like so many things. I can't even get everything straight. And I'm like going through all of my songs that I'm working on that are half finished, just started this idea, right? The thing that I started with Adina a few weeks ago, that had a good vibe to it. What if we do another thing that's sort of in the same vein? So I just work. And because I consider my job as working for other people, except for the brief moments in my life where I actually got to do my own music. Think about it. I've been doing this since I was 18 or 19. Almost all of that has been for other people.
Yeah.
Rarely has it been a Chic record, because there's not many of those.
Yeah.
And most of those records were under extreme duress. And after we got famous, if you will, the last records were really under extreme duress because we never had a hit after our third record. So, all my life is really working to help other people get that ship to port.
Yeah.
And that's really what my life is. And it's not changed. I don't do projects for me. I do projects for them.
Yeah. That early period though, can you identify a sort of another strength of kind of, or direction of purpose, if you like, in that period? What do you think when you look back at Nile at that stage? What do you think was in his head?
I could be honest with you and say that I've never had the time to enjoy a hit record, because from the time that you compose, record, produce, and all those stages that you go through before it becomes a record that's out there for other people to judge, you're on to another 2 or 3 projects. And if in fact that record becomes a hit, whilst you're on those other projects, you go, oh my God, that's a hit. But you're so consumed with what you're doing presently, you can't really bask in that hit, just for a moment. If in fact you get an award or somebody recognizes you, that day you can take off and go to the ceremony and the dinner and have a good time. But the next day you're back at work.
You're back at it, yeah.
And you're trying to figure out what you're doing. Yeah. And it's not because you just want to keep having hits. It's because I work for other people and they want hits, and I'm trying to help them get those hits. And most of the time I'm wrong, but boy, when I'm right, whoa, I'm like really right. You know, it's like life-changing right.
But there's a lot of you're working hard, but you're also playing pretty hard, right? I mean, we'll get to the end of this particular. We'll get to the end of this particular part of the story. But I mean, everything that showbiz has to offer, if I can put it that way, you you were fully indulged. I mean, how do you again, how do you look back on that period of your life from that perspective?
That was something that I almost don't understand, because I was a really shy kid. I remember the first time we had to support our first hit record, and we were in Oakland, California. The day before, we played in Atlantic City in a disco. The next day, we were playing in Oakland Stadium in front of 70,000 people doing dance, 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 yowza, yowza, yowza. And I was backstage and I was shivering like this. I was so afraid to look out there at that mass of humanity. And my guitar tech at the time, he had a styrofoam cup filled with Heineken beer. And he said, "Hey, boss man, try this." And he gave me the beer and I drank it down in just one swig because I wasn't really a drinker at the time. And I felt this warm glow, like from my head down to my toes. And I just turned around and screamed out, "Oakland!" And they went, "Chic!" And we were off and running. And by the time we finished that tour, and that was our first tour, so we were out with Heat Wave and Rufus with Chaka Khan, and Confunction, I think, and Larry Blackman's group. So it was that sort of funk kind of, review thing. But by the end of that first tour, I went from the one cup of Heineken to the entire drum riser filled decoratively with white styrofoam cups because, you get dehydrated. You drink beer under those heavy lights and out there. And we were still an opening act. So we're playing in the sunlight. Yeah. The next thing I know, I was a full-on alcoholic and had to drink before every show and every gig. And almost when you look back upon the Chic years, you always see me with a bottle of Heineken or a glass of something. So what happened was I went from being this incredibly shy kid to a person who developed a show business persona. And, in AA, they call alcohol courage in a bottle. And it's true. All of a sudden, I had courage. I wasn't afraid of 70,000 strangers anymore. In fact, I embraced the fact that 70,000 people who didn't know me somehow felt they knew me. And that was an incredibly satisfying feeling for an artist. I believe you seem to have done your homework very well. So you probably read that part in my book where my music teacher tells me, that any record that's in the top 40 is a great composition, because one day I didn't want to play the gig that I was going to play because I had to start off the set with Sugar Sugar by the Archies, which I thought was horrible and lame. And he said to me, Sugar Sugar's been #1 for 3 weeks. He says, any record in the top 40 is a great composition. I say, how can you say something so ridiculous? He says, it's a great composition, Nile, because it speaks to the souls of a million strangers.
Amazing. No, I'm sorry to ask such a sort of direct question, really, but given given the environment that we described, earlier in your life, you're in show business. You are indulging yourself, as you say, drink. I think you talk about cocaine in your book, but you'd never go near heroin.
No.
So
I was a hippie. I wanted psychedelic drugs, and cocaine is something that happened because of the disco era and success. And I was doing the drug of the people around me.
I get that, but do you think you also made, either subconsciously or consciously, a kind of decision of having seen and been exposed so viscerally to what heroin can do to people, that and people's lives? Do you think that was that part of the thinking, or no?
Yeah, it did. Heroin addicts simply died or lived, and honestly, most of them lived. So yes, there were a number who had overdoses and died, including my biological stepfather. Actually, he died of cirrhosis of the liver. But it didn't seem like heroin addicts died at an alarmingly high rate. It just was part of the vibe. You know, when I was a kid, there were many diseases um, that were pretty lethal. And, you know, I grew up with kids who had braces on their legs. They had polio. They had those diseases that we finally eradicated through vaccines when I was a kid. But I was around to see those diseases go away. So nothing really crazy like that happened again in my life until AIDS and Legionnaire's disease.
Right.
We lived a relatively disease-free life, except for sexually transmitted diseases, because it was the free love era. But other than that, we were pretty fearless. And that was, you know, the sort of hippie thing. You know, we were very, very fearless. We were loving people. We felt like we belonged to this tribe that was big. And what was great about being a hippie is that you could identify other hippies as soon as you saw them. You know, it's like we had a dress code.
It was a community.
Right. Yeah. We talked about how we were individuals. Like, individuals, no way. Man, we could spot a hippie. You go to a town and you see a hippie dude, you know, the hippie chick. It's like, hey, what's happening? Hey, bro, what's up, man? Peace and love.
But underneath all this kind of hippie exterior, I'm interested in resilience. You know, I mean, that's what sits behind, you know, a lot of these questions. That's what this podcast is essentially about. And I've got to ask this story. I've got to ask whether or not this story is true, because it made me laugh out loud. And it's also one of my favorite songs. So Freak Out.
Yes.
I read was originally called Fuck Off
100%.
after you were refused entry to Studio 54. True or false?
100%. 100,000%. Absolutely.
It's a resilience anthem.
You know, the part of the story that a lot of people never hear was that we had been in Studio 54 a great many times before that night that we were refused entry. The reason why we were able to go to Studio 54 was my girlfriend at the time. She was very, very into fashion. And how cool and cute, in a way, was it that my name was Nile and her given name was Nefertiti. So it was Nile and Nefertiti. Nefertiti worked at Fiorucci. She knew all the designers. She was down with Ralston. She was down with Norma Kamali. I mean, everybody. They were all her friends. Tommy Hilfiger, the whole bit. So when I wrote the song, He's the Greatest Dancer, come on. Where did I get it from? My girlfriend. Halston, Gucci, Fiorucci. I mean, it's the first time anybody had ever name-checked fashion designers in a pop song. And believe me, I've checked this out. You look it up, you'll see. Very first time. And now, if you listen to a pop record, oh my God, it's just name-checking after one designer. The only thing that was name-checked in those days were cars. They would say, you know, a Cadillac or driving along in my Oldsmobile or automobile, actually. But, you know, they would talk about crazy about my Mercury. No one ever said,
fashion.
You know, I'm wearing my Givenchy. You know, it was like, but when we said Halston, Gucci, Fiorucci, it was like, one, Sister Sledge didn't even know what we were talking about. They were from Philadelphia. There was no Gucci or like, what are you talking about? But to them, it was like, you know, Pig Latin, you know, they were like, Halston, Gucci, Fiorucci, what is that? Like, it's cool. So
can we move on to Disco Demolition? You know, from this distance, it sort of feels like when you read about it, it feels like some sort of ridiculous stunt, you know. But the impact was existential for you, right? I mean, it was a campaign against disco that was threatening your livelihood for you and Bernard.
Yeah, I sort of had a biphasic reaction to that, because we were gigging in London and we were flying home and reading the newspaper, and they were talking about this event that had happened called Disco Suck. We were completely unaware of it. We also didn't think that people thought we were a disco band. We thought people thought we were an R&B, jazz, funk band, which is what we are.
Yeah.
You know, only one song on the record went off freak out. The
Yeah.
other songs were instrumentals and ballads and, you know, and other hip sounding or reggae, so whatever. But we were branded with the scarlet letter of disco, which we actually grew to be proud of, because that's another longer story. But let me just go back in and fill in the Studio 54 story for you, because
Apologies. Yeah.
no, I jumped. So what happened is, so we had been in Studio 54 many, many times, but that particular night, Grace Jones had invited us personally. Now, we had never spoken to any stars before, let alone have a star call us up and say, come and see me perform. And she was considering having us do what would then be her next album. So she told us to come to the back door and tell them your personal friends of Miss Grace Jones or something like that. And I hate to do accents because it sounds like I'm making fun of people, but Grace's accent is so unique and so bizarre. We actually thought she was putting it on, and that's what we had to do so that the doorman knew that we really were the real people.
Mm.
We knock on the door and we say, hello, we are personal friends of Miss Grace Jones, and blah, blah, blah. And the guy slams the door in our faces and says, oh, fuck off. And we say, no, we are personal friends of Miss Grace Jones. To us, that sounded like a cross between, you know, Marlena Dietrich, Bela Lugosi, and Bob Marley. We couldn't figure it out, but we were doing our best. When he finally slammed the door in our faces the second time, we realized we weren't getting into Studio 54. Fortunately, I lived one block away from the back door of Studio 54. And on my way back to my apartment, Bernard and I passed the liquor store and we bought 2 bottles of Dom Perignon champagne, which we used to call rock and roll mouthwash. We downed those 2 bottles very quickly. And as you know, if you drink champagne really fast, you get, whoa, lightheaded. Like, you know, it goes away after a bit, but you do that thing, you sort of like swinging it down. And so we just started writing the first thing that came to our mind, which was, aw, fuck off. Fuck Studio 54. Fuck off. And we thought of every possible scenario where the only appropriate answer, or the most appropriate answer, would be, fuck off. Fuck you off. Fuck off. And we were into it. We wrote this whole thing. We had a long bridge. It was great. And Bernard finally looked at me and said, my man, you know this shit is happening. And this was like 2 years before hip hop. I'm like, Bernard, how are we going to get this on the radio?
We're on to something, yeah.
And it turned into, aw, fuck off. It turned into, aw, freak out from aw, fuck off.
Amazing. Fantastic. And we've also guaranteed with that story that we absolutely have to put a bad language warning on this podcast, which is just fantastic. Although Chic faded for a while, of course, it never really went away. And your relationship with Bernard, you've described as one of the most important in your life. As he put it, I think, you know, you were his guitarist and he was your bass player. You shared so many, you know, incredible experiences, but also some real moments of crisis, I suspect. Tell me about your relationship now.
It was the best relationship you could ever have musically. And I'm sure all great musical partnerships are a variant of this. They're your most trusted ally and they're your worst enemy. It's like the day you have an idea that you think is amazing and they come in and go, you played that bullshit on the last record. And you went, what are you talking about? This is totally new. And you realize that you are not developing at the same pace, or you're not seeing the world, or there are other distractions. So before Chic, we had distractions that were, I would say, if you have a scale of 1 to 10, we had number 1 level distractions. Once we had hit records, we had number 9 and number 10 level distractions. I think I write in my book, the day when my girlfriend at that time came home and caught me in bed with triplets, these 3 sisters, It's like, I honestly don't even know their names, how they got there, anything like that. But it was like, wow, like, what are the odds that you have three girls that were absolutely gorgeous? They were perfectly willing to have sex with a stranger. Like, the numerical odds of that were absurd. But because we were just in that world and we were those maybe shite, briny things for those 15
Yeah.
years.
No, I need to remind you that this podcast is called Crisis, What Crisis? I'm not sure that qualifies, if I'm honest with you.
It is a crisis. I'd say to my girlfriend. I was pretty drunk.
It's a crisis for your girlfriend, of course. Of course.
But you know, it was it describes my relationship with Bernard. The absolute best of friends. We had the most respect for each other. But then when his world started to crash because of drugs, my world started to crash because of drugs, but in two different ways. Yeah. And it had a lot to do with the way that we were brought up. So Bernard was like a drill sergeant, and I was the class clown. So whenever Bernard was serious, I look back at the band and go, yeah, right. Oh, Mr. Band leader here. I wrote all this shit. Who cares about what he said? You know, that kind of thing. But Bernard was integral. He was a genius band leader. He was so perfect when he would say, Nile, that's too much. Oh, you know what, man? Hey, why don't you do your thing there? You know, he was spot on. Whereas I always wanted to experiment and fool around. So when drugs started to take over our lives, I became more of a taskmaster and wanted to do more and more work. Bernard, for the first time in his life, felt relief. Like, oh my God, I don't have to be a drill sergeant. I can get high and blah, 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 and party, and I don't have to show up for work. I was like, what? Right. I would never dream of not showing up for work. Oh, so the thing that sort of split us apart more than anything was when I did the David Bowie album, Let's Dance, and my favorite musician in the world, I didn't call for Let's Dance until the very last record, until I knew that we had the album in the can, because Bowie was paying out of his own pocket. The last thing I wanted David to do was to see the person I love the most, the best musician in the world, be a complete irresponsible, whatever on a record that David's paying for himself. And at this point, I became super producer, make sure everything is perfect. Everybody's charts are perfect. Just perfect. That Bowie record ran like a well-oiled machine. The fastest record I've ever done in my life, 17 days from start to finish. Every song's one take. There are no second takes. You look at the album, you'll see there's no Let's Dance 1, no Let's Dance 2, no Let's Dance 3. There's Let's Dance, China Girl, blah, blah, blah. And I think there's one song that we did twice just for fun. Yeah, well, it's a work of art. How interesting. You see, what you're saying really, I suppose, is that because of your upbringing, the kind of shared experience that you were having with drugs with Bernard sort of crumbled his foundations much more than they did yours, because of that. It was changing him in a different way, if you like, in a fundamental way. At that moment in time. Yeah. Right. So all of these things were different moments in time. Yes. So at that moment in time, Chic couldn't get arrested. No one would call us back. Funny thing is that when the whole Disco Sucks thing happened, the music media, if you will, pitted us against a group called The Knack that had a record called My Sharona. Both My Sharona and Good Times went to number one, but they were raving about My Sharona, raving. Well, 1 year to the day, the number one record was Another One Bites the Dust. Didn't sound anything like My Sharona, but the hell did it sound like? Good Times. Yes. And, you had Another One Bites the Dust, Radio Clash, Bounce Rock Roll Skate, Rapture, all sounding like variants of Good Times. None of them sounded like My Sharona. Yes. But meanwhile, we never had another hit record again, nor did the Knack. Knack never even had another hit record, period. But at least the legacy of Chic really did live on, and we were proud of that. And we made good records after that, but we were still quite scattered. We were hurt. We didn't understand how people who once loved us the very next day discarded us. And who were our best friends all of a sudden? The people that they said hated us. Rock and rollers were our best friends. Who were at the studio with us every day? Punk rockers. It was, everybody from, Blondie, The Clash, Bow Wow Wow, bands like that were our best friends. Matter of fact, the Knack, who they pitted against us, we were in the studio with them at the same time. We knew Sharona. We went to dinner with Sharona. It was like, why are you making them like our enemies? They're our buddies. They're in the studio next door to us.
No, I'm sorry to sort of, I feel like I'm sort of rattling through, so my apologies. But as I said at the start, on the subject of crisis in your life, there's an awful lot to talk about. Of course, very sadly, Bernard died on April 18th, 1996. He was 43 years old. And it was not long after, hours after, you'd performed together on stage at the end of a Chic tour in Tokyo. Right. You in fact found his body that day. A different crisis, of course, but this time now, one imagines the most sort of extreme, shocking grief.
Yeah, I can say with 100% honesty, I've never bawled and cried and had such an outward display of emotion at any point in my life. My mom tells me that when she put me in a convalescent home when I was 6 years old, that I actually did what they call throwing a conniption. She said, you threw a conniption. So I was screaming and hugging and her leg for dear life. And all the doctors and orderlies had to come out and actually physically grab me. And I'm a skinny 6-year-old asthmatic. But other than that, Bernard's death and finding his body, his cold body directly across from my room. That's how close we were. If in the middle of the night, we're like, hold on, you got an idea. Let me see where you're coming from. That's how our friendship was. So we had broken up for years, and then now we decided to get back together. And we had just made a new Chic album, and we were in Japan, and I had done a number of products in Japan for Japanese artists and bands, and over there we had a lot of support. And so I was doing this thing called the Super Producers, and I had invited Simon Le Bon and Slash, whom he and I had just done a film soundtrack, Steve Winwood, because we did Higher Love together. So it was just a great group of friends. Sister Sledge was there, people that I had made hit records with. The gentleman who sang Soul Glow for the movie Coming to America, Chris Max, it was just great. I wanted to be around people that I loved and people whose lives had changed my life. And of course, Duran. And it was just a wonderful period of time, and to end with Bernard dying like that. And we also put on such a great concert. It was really damn fine.
Yeah. How did you cope? No, in those sort of days immediately after.
Well, the good thing is, like you said, crisis. So maybe that's what I am. I'm a crisis manager. So after my hours of crying and just being totally hysterical, I can't believe that was me. I was just completely hysterical because I wanted to believe that there was something I could have done. Even when I found him, I'm screaming and shaking him and trying to get him to wake up and thinking that he's just gonna go, all right. And none of those things happened, obviously. But finally, all I could do was think of his family and think of his kids and say to myself, now, Bernard was married to my first cousin. So I had to say to myself, knowing that I was going to cause a rift between my first cousin and myself, and she was, you know, we were best friends because she and I were very much alike. But I kept thinking to myself, you know, you're an adult, you're a woman, you got it, you understand. These are children, they've lost their father. All they know is that for most of their lives, their father has been away on the road with this guy, Nile.
Yeah.
And Nile has got to come through and do the best thing for the children. So, you know, I knew that my cousin would be upset for me, and we didn't mend our relationship for years. But I did everything to get Bernard's body embalmed, because they don't believe in that in Japan. So the only two people who did it were two Americans who worked for the military, and the chief of police, who was a brilliant, lovely man, said to me that this one guy is like horrible. He's like a butcher. This other guy is an artist. Make sure you get this other guy to do the embalming. As a matter of fact, I will get him for you. And he got the other guy, and Bernard's body looked perfect, and he looked happy and peaceful. And in Japan, as I said, they, you know, your burial is a Shinto service. And so I never experienced anything like this. Like right away at the police station, I thought that I was going back home to my hotel, but in fact, President Clinton was in town, and the Emperor's Palace was directly across from my hotel. So you know, they cordoned off the area. So now President Clinton was in this sort of like green zone or something, and we couldn't move. So I just had to stay at the police station while President Clinton, you know, moved about. And then when I finally thought they were taking me to my car, they were escorting me to a temple that they had set up at the police station, and they had placed Bernard in a white kimono with a coffin that had a glass front, and the chief of police said, "Go, be with your friend." And I was like, wow, this was so unlike America. And America would be like, oh, he's a black man, drug addict, blah, blah, musician, and so on.
Yeah.
So
just a total respect that they were true. Yeah.
It was,
which must have been an enormous comfort. No, can I ask? And I'm very conscious here that I'm sort of squeezing, you know, unbelievably kind of traumatic, complex experiences in your life and summarizing them, for which apologies. But it all, I suppose, if I could summarize very quickly, they all lead to the same question, really. But, you know, 12 years before Bernard's death, you yourself, you know, collapsed after a night out, to put it mildly, with Robert Downey Jr., you know, fueled by, you know, cocaine and alcohol. The medics arrive. Your heart stops 8 times. Doctor begins to write out your death certificate when you begin to breathe again. We fast forward through your life, and we're at 2010, and crisis comes again when you're diagnosed with prostate cancer. As you said, everything in my happy music universe imploded. 2013, you're given the all clear, thank God. And in 2017, you undergo surgery again after a growth is found on your right kidney. All of these crises sort of lead me to the same question, really. And it's just simply this, you know, what is it? Because this podcast is about lessons, okay, for people whose lives have unraveled for whatever reason. Whole range of different topics that we've discussed so far on this podcast. But what is it about your approach, about your mindset that has allowed you to cope, not just cope, thrive in the midst of so much crisis?
As I said, you made me realize that maybe what my real job is that I'm a crisis manager. I wake up every day with a problem. I have something to solve. I don't have something to bask and sort of wallow in. I actually have something to fix every day that I wake up, even on my day off. My day off allows me to catch up with all the things that I let lag. It's just a work ethic that's built into me. And I really saw it on display when I had to take care of Bernard's body and get that done right. And right now, what I'm going through with my mom, she's dead a month to this day. Tomorrow will be the 27th. She died 6 a.m. on the morning of December 27th. And she is still in a refrigerated truck with dozens of bodies, and I've had to deal with that, and I've had to not be hysterical. I've had to be very, very calm. I never play the sort of, I'm the rock and roll star, I'm in the rock and roll. I mean, that's so it's like, to me, just the concept of that feels like,
I mean, you're in the midst of that crisis now, but please God, it passes, sooner rather than later. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this would say exactly the same thing to you. But when you are through the other side of these myriad of crises that you've had, how do you manage it for yourself? You've described how you've managed it for others, but how do you manage it for yourself? What is the Nile Rodgers kind of crisis process for you?
I lose myself in music. When I wrote the song Lost in Music, it was knowing early on in my life that music was my therapy, that music was my friend, my companion, and that it would never desert me. And even if somehow I was no longer able to perform it on a virtuosic level, if I even think I am one,
you are.
If I wasn't able to perform it on the level that I achieved, that even at an elementary level, music is wonderful. And if somehow my skills diminish and go to a point where they're almost rudimentary like, and I could just play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or something like that, I know that still gives you a great deal of joy, just the fact that you can pull it off. It's almost like people in rehabilitation. When I was stricken with my first bout of cancer, it was so debilitating, but I had really cool friends around me who had opened up and said, you know what, guess what? I never told you this, but when we were 21 and going to school, I was in medical school, and 2 days that week, I was in the OR. One, I was operating on a patient, and the second day I was getting operated on myself. I was like, well, you had cancer at 21? Yep, I never told you. So that friend of mine helped me. And then other friends of mine started to open up because they were afraid to talk about it. And I had a lot of commitments. So I decided, man, this is going to be crazy trying to call everybody and tell them why I can't do. We were going to do the Emmy Awards, I believe, or the Academy Awards. I can't remember, but it was some big television award show. And we couldn't do it, as well as other things. And I just said, look, let me just tell everybody at the same time. So I did my first blog. I couldn't believe it. 200,000 people read about me having cancer.
No, your blog is incredible. It is and it was one of the sort of first of its type as well, in a way. I think it encouraged an awful lot of other people to sort of share their story in that way. It was innovative, if that's the right word to apply to something.
It actually really was, because I put so much into it. I did more than 400, and I didn't miss a day.
Yeah, no, it was totally frank and open. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and the way that I came up with the name was because that friend of mine who had cancer at 21, he told me all of the horrors that I would face over the next few months. And I went, that's not who I am. What are you talking about? That's not going to happen to me. And he looked at me and said, yeah, brother, welcome to life on planet C. Yeah. And so I called it walking on planet C, because walking after the surgery was my therapy. Just walk 5 miles a day, snow, ice, and on those walking adventures, it was actually incredible because I got to relive my life as a New Yorker and all the places. And I can't tell you how many times I was walking down the street and they're doing a film, and I'll say, like, I got to know everybody who's on that film set, and go in there. There's Eddie Murphy and, you know, and all sorts of people I knew. And it was an incredible recovery. So when I was stricken with cancer the second time, it was almost like routine. It was almost like a piece of cake because I wasn't afraid. I had accepted the fact that death could be inevitable. But if it weren't inevitable, then I'll do whatever I do to get over it. And I would listen to my doctors. I never tried to be smarter than the people who I had chosen to help me get through it. And I listened and I did what they said, and I listened and I did what they said. And whenever I couldn't do what they said, I did what they said.
Yeah. Niall, you've been incredibly generous with your time, but also with your insights. I'm going to ask you for your crisis cures in a second, but before we do so, will you allow me to indulge myself in what is actually a self-indulgent thank you? Because I had a period of my life which was suboptimal. In 2013, I was preparing to go on trial, the trial that unfortunately led to me going to prison for a while. And in April of that year, a song is released by Daft Punk that you'd co-written that became a huge hit and a huge Coulson family anthem. A song that absolutely helped me get through a period when I felt at my unluckiest, if I can put it that way. And that song, of course, was Get Lucky. So I'm going to, as I say, very self-indulgently, I'm afraid, say thank you for it, sincerely. But I'm also now going to ask you for your crisis cures. So these are three things, specific things. You've talked wonderfully in general terms about the importance and power of music to you. But I'd like you, please, to give us three specific things. Anything other than another human being that you've lent on during those moments of crisis that you've described so so wonderfully for us today.
Yeah, I unfortunately I'm a real loner, even though I have wonderful people around me. But I go to my guitar, I go to my music, I go to my art. That really helps me. I also look towards my work. I say to myself, I need to be better. I need to get well because this person needs my help. And even if they're really famous and they don't really need my help, I make myself believe that, because for me, having a job to do makes me feel that I have to be subordinate to the situation rather than be subordinate to my own ego and my own needs. And that really helps me a great deal. And the other thing, believe it or not, is I just do very simple exercises to not overly tax me, because I'm not trying to get all buffed or anything like that. But I just do simple things to make my body and brain aware. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. Right now, I'm 68 years old, right? And right now, I am now training my left hand to snap, because I've never been able to snap my left finger. Like I could do, I can conduct an orchestra with
all right,
finger, like, no matter what tempo, like that. But my left hand, I'm just starting to get it, and it's coming. It's
How long have you been doing this?
About 3 weeks now.
Right.
And before you couldn't get an audible sound.
Yeah.
But I got an audible sound. Not quite that, It's not that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to stop until they sound the same.
This is a great demonstration of the power of small tasks, right?
And this is what it's doing, is it's making a side of my brain work that normally would not be doing this.
Yeah.
And if you do that, I found that if you teach yourself to write with your left hand and you're right-handed, or vice versa, or you teach yourself to do something the other way around, like I might even turn my guitar over and try and start playing left-handed. That's a big task. I may not go that far.
I've mentioned Get Lucky being a crisis anthem for me. I'm only going to allow you one. What is your crisis? What is your go-to crisis song?
Not even a thought. John Coltrane, A Love Supreme.
Amazing. And has been for a long time?
Since I was a teenager. It puts me in a space where it just right away, just like the world becomes a peaceful place. Probably if they were going to put me in front of a firing squad and they say, would you like to have your last meal or your last cigarette? I say, no, man, just play the beginning of the Love Supreme. I'll close my eyes and play it and you guys shoot away.
Amazing. Nile Rodgers, I can't thank you enough for your time. And as I said earlier, your wisdom today, it's deeply appreciated. It's a pleasure to meet you, albeit virtually.
Thank you, man.
I'm not entirely sure how to reflect on that conversation with Nile. From the off, it was clear that we were in the presence of greatness. The legendary musical status needs no explanation. Just stick his name into Spotify and you'll see what I mean. A breathtaking catalogue. But it was Nile's willingness to share his thoughts on the difficult moments of his life that at times left me open-mouthed. That he was so willing to do so whilst living another painful, tragic crisis following his mother's death made those reflections all the more powerful. As Nile came to realise, though, during our conversation, he is a crisis manager. But it's not entirely selfless work. Solving or easing his and others' problems is clearly a form of therapy for him. It's what got him through and gets him through his own issues as well. And of course, there have been plenty. There were so many words of wisdom to remember from this podcast, but for me, Nile's near lifelong credo is the winner. When he said, I saw Ben-Hur as a child and will never forget when the commander tells the galley slaves, you live to serve the ship. Row well and live. And that's what I do. I row well, live, and every day do my best to get the ship to port. Just fantastic. Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Feel free to send us your feedback. You'll find our contact details and our show notes giving you the key insights from our guests at crisiswhatcrisis.com. There are also links to our newsletter, Facebook page and Instagram. There are more useful conversations on the way soon, and if you enjoyed this podcast, please do give us a rating and a review. Thanks again.